David had always been proud of how far he'd come in his career. As a project manager, his job was demanding, requiring frequent business trips across the country. The pay was solid, and he enjoyed the dynamic pace, at least until he got married. After marrying Rachel, what used to be just part of the job started to feel like a burden. Every time he packed his suitcase, it wasn't just logistics he had to worry about, it was emotional warfare. Rachel, though beautiful and passionate, had a volatile streak. She hated being left alone and made sure David knew it. She'd pack her own bags dramatically, shouting that she was going to stay with her mother, accusing him of abandoning her, of choosing work over family. These tantrums happened like clockwork before every trip. David, trying to maintain peace, would chase after her, apologize profusely, and beg her to come home. Eventually, she would, but the emotional toll was building. To outsiders, this seemed unreasonable. A colleague once advised David to put his foot down, to shout back, to take control. But David just smiled weakly and shrugged it off. He knew it wouldn't help. Rachel wasn't someone you could shout down, and truthfully, he still loved her deeply. She had a magnetic pull, long dark hair, expressive eyes, and a fiery presence that both thrilled and exhausted him. In his mind, this was just part of married life. You weathered the storms, right? 2 years into their marriage, Rachel announced she was pregnant. Though unplanned, David was genuinely excited. He thought maybe the baby would calm her, give their relationship new direction. And for a while, it did. When their daughter Melody was born, Rachel softened. She poured herself into motherhood and, for a short time, the explosive arguments stopped. But peace was short-lived. As Melody grew older and needed less constant attention, Rachel's old patterns began to resurface. The tantrums returned, sometimes even worse than before. David tried to stay grounded. He reasoned with her, tried to keep things stable for the sake of their daughter. Still, every trip became a nightmare. One evening, as he packed for another journey, Rachel exploded again, throwing his suitcase into the hallway and screaming that if he left, he shouldn't bother coming back. Their daughter, startled by the yelling, burst into tears from her room. David calmed Melody first, then silently picked up his scattered clothes, wondering how long he could keep doing this. Despite everything, David remained committed. He still believed, or hoped, that things could change. Rachel, like many emotionally unstable partners, always apologized sweetly afterward, whispering that she didn't mean it, that she was just emotional. And each time, David forgave her. He loved his wife, and he loved his family, but deep down, a quiet voice had begun to whisper, something wasn't right. Something was about to break. Everything changed the day David picked up Melody from preschool. It was supposed to be a celebration. His last business trip was behind him, and he had finally landed a new position that meant no more travel. He felt relieved, even excited, to be home more, to spend quality time with his daughter, and to rebuild his connection with Rachel. As he buckled Melody into her car seat, she beamed up at him, full of energy and joy. "How have you been, sweet pea?" he asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror as they pulled away. "Good," she chirped back, then leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Want to hear a secret?" David smiled, expecting something cute and innocent, maybe about a classroom crush or a funny story. "Sure, Mel. Tell me," he said casually. What came next hit him like a punch to the chest. "Sometimes when you're gone, a man named Nick comes to pick me up with Mommy. He comes to our house too." Her voice was light, unaware of the weight her words carried. David's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He tried to sound normal. "Nick? Do you know who he is?" Melody just shrugged. "Mommy says he's a friend." The rest of the ride was quiet, but inside, David's mind was spiraling. Could Rachel really be cheating on him? Had all her fits about him traveling been a cover for her own unfaithfulness? For days, David didn't know what to do with the information. He kept playing it over in his head, trying to rationalize it. Maybe Nick was just a coworker. Maybe Melody misunderstood. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. He confided in his friend Kyle, explaining what Melody had said and the strange calmness Rachel had shown recently. No tantrum when he'd left on that final trip. No drama. Just oddly relaxed. Kyle didn't hesitate. "You need to know for sure. Hire a private investigator. Find out what's really going on." David hesitated. It felt like betrayal to spy on his wife, even if he feared she was already betraying him. "What if they only meet up when I'm away?" he asked. Kyle shrugged. "If they're doing something behind your back, It's not going to matter if you're home or not. If anything, they're probably more careless when you're gone. Reluctantly, David agreed. He hired a pie to follow Rachel for a week. The waiting was excruciating. Every day, he wondered what was happening. Rachel seemed unusually cheerful, affectionate, even, which only deepened his suspicion. Something felt off. And though he hoped desperately to be wrong, part of him was bracing for the truth. Melody's innocent voice echoed in his mind over and over again. A man named Nick comes to our house. And now, David was beginning to realize, even the smallest voices can reveal the biggest betrayals. The wait for the private investigator's findings felt like torture. David counted the days, barely sleeping, his thoughts spiraling as he replayed Melody's words and Rachel's recent behavior. Something in his gut told him that the truth was close, and that it wouldn't be pretty. For the first time since marrying Rachel, David found himself emotionally distancing from her. Every hug, every smile she gave him during those 2 weeks felt rehearsed, almost artificial. And the strangest part? Rachel didn't explode when he left for his last trip. No screaming, no threats to move out, just a strange calmness that only deepened his suspicion. Finally, the day came. David met the investigator in the dim corner of a mall parking garage, a place chosen for discretion. The man, sharply dressed in a blue overcoat, handed him a plain envelope. "Everything's in here," he said simply. David's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Rachel, with a man he'd never seen before, at various restaurants, outside her office building, walking through parks. In some, they were holding hands. In others, they were kissing. And in the most damning of all, the man had his hand beneath her sweater as they embraced outside a cafe. The man's name was Dennis. According to the report, he worked with Rachel at her company. The investigator had provided a full dossier: name, workplace, background. David felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. Dennis wasn't Nick, the name Melody had mentioned, but now it was clear, Rachel had been lying not just about one thing, but likely everything. The pieces clicked together. The tantrums, the guilt tripping over his job, the sudden softness when he agreed to stop traveling, it had all been about control, distraction, and deceit. David dropped Melody off at his parents' house before going home. He didn't want her to be there when the confrontation happened. He walked into the house calmly, still wearing his coat, and laid the photos on the kitchen table. Rachel was there, waiting, probably expecting the usual routine. But this time, David said nothing. He simply gestured toward the evidence. She glanced at the photos with a raised eyebrow, then met his gaze. No panic. No guilt. Just a cold, irritated glare. "You spied on me," she said, her tone venomous. "Have you lost your mind?" David was stunned. He had expected tears, begging, some sign of remorse. Instead, Rachel sneered. "I was going to leave you anyway. Now I don't have to. And by the way, good job wasting money on that little detective stunt." That was the moment David truly saw her for who she was. Not the woman he fell in love with, but someone cold, manipulative, and unapologetically cruel. He told her she had 1 week to move out. She laughed and said she only needed a day. And just like that, the marriage ended, not in heartbreak, but in brutal clarity. Rachel's exit from their lives was as abrupt as her betrayal. The woman who had once demanded so much attention, who raged at every business trip and begged for more time together, didn't shed a single tear when David told her it was over. She gathered her things in less than a day, just as she promised, and left without a backward glance. There was no apology, no second thoughts, and most painfully, no goodbye to Melody. David had expected a custody battle, or at least an emotional breakdown. But instead, Rachel signed over full custody of their daughter without protest, brushing it off like a minor inconvenience. She promised she'd visit, but the weeks turned into months, and no visits ever came. At first, David was heartbroken, not for himself, but for Melody. He dreaded the day she would ask where her mother had gone. But young as she was, Melody adapted quickly. She had her father, and her grandmother, who lovingly stepped into a nurturing, maternal role without hesitation. Together, they formed a new kind of family, quieter, simpler, and filled with a peace that had never existed when Rachel was in the house. Rachel didn't end up with Dennis either. Word eventually reached David that she had been seen around town with different men, often intoxicated, drifting from bar to bar. While part of him still wrestled with the pain she caused, another part began to feel relief. relief that Melody wouldn't grow up under her toxic influence. The truth had hurt, but it had also freed him. The home once filled with shouting, tension, and emotional manipulation was now a place of calm routines and genuine laughter. David didn't rush into another relationship. He wasn't ready, and he didn't need to be. He focused all his energy on Melody, picking her up from school, taking her on weekend trips, and being the constant presence he never had growing up. Every hug, every bedtime story, every moment shared with her helped rebuild the parts of him Rachel had broken. In time, the wounds began to close. David found joy in the little things again: morning pancakes with Melody, movie nights on the couch, gardening on Sundays with his mother. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was real, and it was his. Most importantly, it was rooted in truth, not illusion. Years later, when Melody was a teenager, she finally asked about her mom. David told her everything, not with bitterness, but with honesty. She listened, quietly, then told him, "You did the right thing, Dad." That moment confirmed it all. He had made the hardest choice, not just to leave a toxic partner, but to protect his daughter from becoming another casualty of a broken relationship. Sometimes peace doesn't come with victory, it comes with letting go. And David had finally let go, choosing love, honesty, and healing, for himself and for Melody. Years passed, but the memory of Rachel's betrayal never truly disappeared. It simply dulled, softened by time and replaced with something more meaningful: peace. David never forgot the way his marriage ended, how coldly Rachel had dismissed both him and Melody without a second thought. But instead of allowing that pain to define his life, he channeled it into something greater, being the kind of parent Melody deserved. He promised himself that she would never feel the confusion and hurt that he had carried. And slowly, one moment at a time, he built a life that was rooted in stability, love, and truth. David never remarried. People often asked why, as years went by and Melody grew older. But his answer was always simple: "I already have everything I need." And he meant it. His daughter became the center of his world, not as a burden, but as a blessing. They traveled together, explored nature trails on weekends, built sandcastles on beaches during summer breaks. Each laugh, each hug was a reminder that even broken beginnings can lead to beautiful chapters. His mother, too, played a vital role, helping raise Melody with warmth and wisdom, stepping into a role Rachel had abandoned without hesitation. What amazed David most was how resilient children can be. Melody thrived. She grew into a thoughtful, kind, and confident young girl, one who understood what love looked like because her father showed her every day. There were no lies in their home, no secrets, no manipulation. Just a quiet bond, built on trust and time. And as she matured, David watched with pride, knowing that while he may not have given her a traditional family, he had given her a safe one. Looking back, David didn't see himself as a victim. If anything, Rachel's betrayal had been a turning point. It forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, not only about his marriage, but about himself. He had spent years trying to keep the peace, walking on eggshells, bending to emotional chaos for the sake of appearances. But real peace, he learned, comes when you stop accepting less than you deserve. It's found in the quiet dignity of choosing clarity over confusion, and emotional honesty over convenient lies. David no longer harbored hatred for Rachel. In some strange way, her leaving had been a gift, not for the pain, but for the freedom it gave him. She had removed herself from their lives, and in doing so, made room for healing. Melody had grown up without bitterness, and David had grown stronger in the process. Now, when people asked him if he was lonely, he would smile and say, "Not at all." Because in the laughter of his daughter, in the stillness of his evenings, in the integrity of the life he chose to live, David had found everything he needed. Not through revenge, not through replacement, but through resilience, fatherhood, and the power of walking away with grace. David's story wasn't just one of heartbreak, it was one of awakening. Beneath the layers of betrayal and emotional chaos lay a powerful realization: sometimes, the greatest danger in a relationship isn't the affair itself, but the quiet erosion of self-respect. For years, David had convinced himself that Rachel's outbursts, her mood swings, and her constant emotional manipulation were just part of married life. He tolerated her tantrums, her passive-aggressive jabs, and her volatility because he loved her, or at least, he loved the version of her he had met in the beginning. What he didn't realize was that every time he chased her down the hallway, apologized when he wasn't at fault, or ignored his own exhaustion just to keep the peace, he was slowly abandoning himself. It wasn't until Melody's innocent words exposed the cracks that David began to truly see. And once the truth was laid bare, through photos, through Rachel's remorseless confession, the illusion shattered completely. That moment, painful as it was, became the first time David chose himself. Not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. Because real love doesn't demand you lose your dignity. Real love doesn't force you to sacrifice your inner peace just to keep someone else comfortable. The lesson wasn't just that Rachel had cheated. It was that David had spent too long ignoring his own needs, brushing off his gut feelings, and tolerating behavior that chipped away at his confidence. The betrayal forced him to reevaluate not just his marriage, but his boundaries, his values, and the kind of example he wanted to set for his daughter. He realized that Melody wasn't just watching how he treated her, she was watching how he allowed others to treat him. And if he didn't protect his peace, how could he ever teach her to protect hers? In the years that followed, David never looked back with hatred. Instead, he looked back with clarity. Rachel's choices were a reflection of her character, not of his worth. And that separation gave him the space to grow into a version of himself that was no longer passive or people-pleasing. He became deliberate with his time, intentional with his words, and fiercely protective of his energy. He understood that not everyone is meant to stay in your life, and that's okay. Some people come into your story as a warning. Others, like Melody, become your reason to rewrite it. Today, David lives simply. No drama, no emotional roller coasters, just a quiet home filled with laughter, trust, and authenticity. He has no regrets. Because while he couldn't control Rachel's betrayal, he could control his response. And he chose the one thing that many never dare to claim after heartbreak: peace through self-respect. In the quiet that followed Rachel's departure, David discovered a truth that eludes many. Peace isn't something you find, it's something you create, especially after loss. At first, the silence in the house felt deafening. No more slammed doors, no emotional ambushes, no walking on eggshells. It was strange, unfamiliar. But with each passing day, the absence of chaos made room for something deeper: clarity. David didn't just survive betrayal, he used it as fuel to rebuild his life on his own terms, with one guiding purpose: to be the kind of man his daughter could be proud of. Raising Melody alone wasn't easy, but it was meaningful. In every school pickup, bedtime story, and kitchen dance, David infused their days with the love and presence that Rachel had long withheld. He didn't pretend to be perfect, but he was present. He didn't have all the answers, but he always listened. As Melody grew, so did his confidence as a father. And with time, that once wounded heart of his found strength not in romantic love, but in devotion, to truth, to peace, and to his daughter. The day Melody asked about her mother was a defining one. David didn't sugarcoat the past, but he didn't poison it either. He told the truth gently but clearly: "Your mom made choices that hurt us, but I chose to protect you. That's why we are where we are today." Melody didn't cry. She nodded, quietly absorbing the weight of his words. Then, like the young woman she was becoming, she simply said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." That moment meant everything. David realized then that life had given him something rare, not just a second chance, but the wisdom to live it better. He never remarried, not because he was bitter, but because he was fulfilled. His home was full of joy, laughter, and calm. He cooked dinner with Melody, played board games with her grandmother, and on quiet nights, read books alone with a warm cup of tea. No drama, no lies, just presence. He had once thought that being a man meant enduring, sacrificing, keeping the family together no matter the cost. But now he knew, being a real man means having the courage to walk away from what breaks you, and the strength to build something healthier in its place. David didn't just move on, he leveled up. Not with someone new, but with a new understanding of himself. And through that, he gave his daughter a model of resilience, integrity, and quiet strength. Because sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do isn't to fight for someone else, it's to finally fight for yourself. As we move through life's middle chapters, many of us hold on to relationships out of routine, fear, or the belief that sacrifice is always noble. But David's story reminds us that peace is not a luxury, it's a necessity, especially when you're sharing your life with someone. Living with emotional manipulation, dishonesty, or constant chaos doesn't make you loyal, it makes you lost. The most powerful moment in David's journey wasn't discovering the betrayal, it was what he did afterward. He chose to protect his daughter's emotional future and reclaim his own dignity. In doing so, he showed that walking away from a toxic partner is not weakness, it's wisdom. You're not just ending a relationship, you're making space for clarity, self-worth, and the kind of love that honors your peace. For anyone struggling in silence, know this: your children learn not only from how you love them, but from how you allow yourself to be treated. Choosing peace, truth, And emotional safety isn't just about you, it's the legacy you leave behind. And in a world full of noise, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk toward the quiet.